Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Tomorrow, and officially week 2 of our summer reading in the book, The Anxious Generation. And Mo, man, I don't know about you. Like, this book it's a tough one. It's a tough read.
It really is. It gives you some, I don't know, for me, I had to step back and realize, okay, what are my kids going through right now? Mm-hmm. And where have I lacked, in leadership? And so I think the response that we've gotten from our clients who have joined us, and thank you for joining us on this journey, I think this is a growing conversation that people are having with themselves about, what is going on with our youth these days with respects to social media, technology, the influence it has on them. And you could just tell just from the fact that people are joining us on this journey. Yeah,
for sure. And, I would agree with you. Like, going through, as a father of three boys for me, it's, my oldest son is about to be 16 years old. I have a son that's almost 13 in less than a month and a half, and a 10-year-old boy. And so, just looking back at what we've already allowed them to do, and I say allow them, whether it was intentional or unintentional, they're under our stewardship and guardianship. So, what they're doing, we've allowed them to do, and looking back, it's like we just we got to button it up. These are questions that oftentimes I feel like we've had, or even conversations I feel like we've had with our friends of like, we're the first generation to raise children in a season and a culture and a society that's so driven by technology, and so we've made these comments, but not really having any substance to support any maybe concerns that we have. And so, just really even this first chapter, we did the intro last week, jumping into the first chapter this week, it brings a lot to life. And it is. It's a tough one to swallow for sure.
It is. And the good thing about it is, as we go through this book, hopefully we find ways that we can help combat some of these influences that are impacting our kids, and we can learn from it, and hopefully our kids come out better understanding this. I mean, I know Olivia has already made some adjustments to her own screen time and her own social media use, and not from reading the book, but from just me talking about the book. Right? She hasn't read it, but me talking about, I'm noticing you always being on your phone. I mean, the other day it was pretty interesting, but her friend came over, spent the night. Next morning, I'm making breakfast, and they come downstairs, and both of them are sitting on the kitchen counter. They're sitting at the kitchen counter with their phones, not talking to each other. And I was like, I know you didn't come here to spend the night just to look on Snapchat and look at Instagram across each other. I'm sure you came here to talk to each other and have fun. And they were laughing, and then they, put the phones down and started talking. But their natural, almost instinct was, if there's a gap, if there's a pause in conversation or a pause in what's going on around them, let me just pick up my phone and see what's going on in the virtual world.
Right. And it's just
it's insane.
It is. It's insane. It's absurd. But even our generation and older generations. So we're talking about baby boomers, The truth is they do it too.
Yeah.
Now they may not live with the effects or the psychological effects of being raised in a world that's, basically virtual. But their use of the technology is pretty rapid too. I almost feel like, well, actually I saw, let me just say this. I saw this in a YouTube video talking about technology, a YouTube video about a gentleman who wrote a book, and gosh darn it, this is totally off the hip, but the book is called Virtual Cocaine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Virtual Cocaine.
What a title.
I believe that's the title of the book, Virtual Cocaine. And actually the image in the front of the book is basically a phone with a youth or adolescent child, a teenager, basically snorting a line of cocaine. Although the line's not there, it's as if he's snorting technology. And
okay.
the author of the book is, he's talking, he's going through kind of a similar, this is back, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And he's talking about how the older generation, the baby boomers, have adapted to the technology so well, but to the extent that they don't actually see anything wrong with it because they use it. And so they use it and they're like, well, not a big deal. It's we love the benefits. We reap the benefits. And it's not that the technology is bad, but obviously their foundation psychologically has been established and built 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, right? So they're not going to be easily, I guess influence is not the right word, but they're not going to be easily changed as far as who they are mentally as a result of jumping into technology in their 60s, right? So what he says is, oftentimes you'll hear people, and I'm like, oh, I've heard that. You'll hear grandparents brag about their grandchildren and make statements like, my grandchild is so brilliant. You ought to see the way they use a device. Okay. They're like, the child is 2 years old or 3 years old and can literally, swipe through, can unlock the phone or whatever. And he poses the question, he said, really, is that a true way of defining a child's intellect or the strength of their academia or how smart they are? And he said, or is it really defining the ingenuity of the engineer that created the device? Do you not think that the design in and of itself was built in a way
that even a 2-year-old
that even a 2 or 3-year-old could use the device? He's like, here point. We are at 50, 60 years old thinking our kid is smart. No. Could it have just been made that way for that purpose?
I never thought about it that way. I've never thought about it that way.
And so it's like, okay, well, yes, it becomes a pacifier, it becomes a babysitter, and unfortunately in today's world, it becomes a disciple, because we're sitting here handing our young kids these devices and saying, here, go enjoy yourself for a little bit. We're trying to have some adult time. And once again, we're not saying that the technology's terrible. It's our parenting that becomes more of a conflict. But it's like, is that really, a way of defining your child, or is it actually the ingenuity that is, becoming, that is built in a way to make it addictive to even the youngest of those?
Yeah, because even in this first chapter, I don't know about you, but I didn't get the sense that he was saying that the technology is bad, or that social media is bad. He names a number of different social media platforms, and I didn't get the sense that he was saying that, oh, these are just bad, bad tools, bad sources. I mean, right now we're talking right now, and we're delivering a content that's going to be displayed on multiple different social media platforms. So the platforms aren't an issue in itself, but I think the thesis is at what age is it appropriate to introduce our adolescent to these platforms, right? Because it is, like you mentioned, you could be 60 years old and use these platforms, but your wiring as an adult has already been done already prior to this rise of social media and technology. And so, we being millennials, we didn't go through this rise in social media and this type of technology during our pubescent years.
Yeah.
Right? We were a little much older past that. So our foundation and our wiring was already set in our own culture already. These kids nowadays they're being, like you said, left to these devices in some aspects and all these influences during this crucial time in their development. And we don't know what they're being exposed to. We have an idea of what they're being exposed to, but we can't control it. And and as a society, we haven't allowed ourselves to control it. We've allowed these companies, we've allowed these quote unquote influencers to influence our kids.
Yeah.
And hopefully that, after reading this book, we can come back and say, okay, what needs to be changed? Yeah. He outlines a couple of things that could be done like right now. one thing he says is, in schools, don't allow kids to have smartphones in school.
Period. Yeah.
And I found it really, really interesting that, my kids, the older ones, well, I guess Olivia too, they're allowed to bring smartphones in class and use it in class.
Oh, for sure.
And teachers have said, okay, if you're done with your work, go ahead and go on your phone. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm. I mean, me and you have sat here, and I know I've showed you before, and I'm like, my son's texting me.
Right.
My response is like, get to work. Like, what are you doing?
And
like,
they're not even hiding it.
Like, I'm not texting you in a meeting.
Right,
why are you texting me in class? Get to work.
Right. And I thought they were hiding it, under a desk between a book. No,
right.
It's out in the open, and their teachers have allowed it. And in some areas, it's like, well, this is the only way we can control the kids from being outlandish, or disrupting the class. So if we can hone them down and let them be on their phones, we can at least have order in the classroom.
Right.
And that is, I can't imagine that.
It is. You're 100% right. And guardrails have to be in place. They need to be placed in every area of your life.
Right.
Right. And that goes, physically, spiritually, in your workforce or workplace, it just needs to be. And with this subject matter, the reality is we just, it's new. We haven't had the data. We've known something isn't right, but we haven't really had any great facts, I guess, or have been diligent enough to search them out to really understand what boundaries need to be in place. And so, lastly, before we jump in here, I think what you were mentioning when in regards to our anatomy and physiology, you look at these young kids that are going through these vital seasons of life, which is what this chapter is really going to expose. They're going through, when I say vital seasons, they're young, so they're getting they're growing, they're developing quickly, physically and mentally and emotionally, and we all know that those are monumental years to the rest of their life.
My gosh, yes.
I mean, and it's not that a child grown up in a challenging situation can't turn a life around and progress forward. It's that the challenges for that young child is just so much more because of what they go through, what they're absorbing at a young age. And so I think what we're going to find and what you and I are going to discuss is that, hey, it's not just what we think, it's true. The data's out there.
Right.
And that is what the author of this book, Haidt, Jonathan Haidt. There we go. Yeah, that's kind of what he details. Let's start with, first off, we're in chapter 1, The Surge of Suffering, which is alarming title in and of itself.
Right.
Okay, The Surge of Suffering. And he starts out, I want to read just a quick sentence here and get your thoughts. He says there's an underlying worry that something unnatural is going on and that our children are missing something, really almost everything, as their online hours accumulate. When I read that, I thought, you know what? I agree with you 100%. I think most of us know, like, something's not right here. Something's not right. And he writes this, and just kind of elaborate a little bit, Mo, on what he discussed last week with just the general change between this whole play-based childhood and
the phone-based
childhood.
Yeah, as a child, I vividly remember, I want to say it was around 3rd grade, 4th grade, definitely 4th grade. So when you're in 4th grade, what are you, like 9, 10, somewhere around there? I remember because my sister and I are 4 years apart. So when she was going into high school, I was going into 5th grade, I believe. So I remember going to school by myself, not on a school bus, but on a New York City, bus, and then hopping on a subway 20, 30 minutes, and then walking from the subway to my school.
At how old?
8, 9, 10 the latest, as far as like when I started. But definitely from that point on, I was out in the world, you know.
Yeah, even probably before 10, mom's letting you leave the house.
Oh yeah.
Go play with your buddies at the local park.
Oh yeah, you know, being a single mom, you know, my dad passed when I was 3, so you know, my sister and I picked up the slack around the house. So it was, you know, we were going to the grocery stores by ourselves. You know, we were going to the laundromat. We were going to, you know, run some errands for my mother while she worked, right? And so we were just, I won't say roaming the streets, but we were out about in the world as kids, you know, and playing and, you know, seeing friends. I mean, some of my friends lived 20 minutes away as walking distance. And so I would walk there, right? So so I think what some of the kids nowadays are missing is that independence of, you know, being under, I won't say parents' control, but being in the house itself and not being able to experience the world outside. And they're missing some of the communication that is done face to face, that interpersonal communication that they're missing. And I think some parents realize that.
There is no doubt that the childhood experience is different.
Yeah.
For sure. I feel like my boy, I was actually talking with Drew, my oldest son, last night, which, you know, right or wrong from a parenting standpoint, we were talking while he's laying in my bed. And I'm like, dude, you're 16 almost. Like, it's time you got to get the heck out, you know, go get out of here. But anyway, he's, matter of fact, I was watching a video that is this author of this book was doing a speaking engagement at some institution, and so he was intrigued. So we were watching it together. But the conversation came up on this whole child-based, play-based childhood, and you know, I feel like my boys, at least that season, they did kind of get to experience it. But I remember thinking, man, this is so different, I think, than what's out there in the world. We just so happened to, you know, live in a small neighborhood, which was helped support us allowing them to go, number one, small neighborhood. And we had multiple families in the neighborhood that we were really close to that also had kids our kids' age. So he said, you know, I felt like I kind of had that. You know, I was able to leave the house and go and play and do all these things. But, and so that's good. But for me, I'm with you, Mo. I remember, you know, so 3 sisters. You're married to one of them, which I'm still not happy about. But that's okay. No, it's fine. Okay, so 3 sisters, and I can remember in Rome, Georgia. All right, my oldest sister taking us occasionally. It may only happen once, but you know, hey, your memories go back. You think it's all the time. Occasionally, walking us through the backyard, which was like we had a fence, hole in the fence. You go through that, and then you go through the wooded area and a trail over to the backside of the Piggly Wiggly. Okay. Now, when we lived in Rome, I was like, I turned 5 living in Cartersville, so I was, you know, 3 or 4. But I remember walking with them, just my siblings, to the Piggly Wiggly. When we were in Cartersville, though, 6, 7, 8 years old, I mean, I'm going to say 6 and 7 definitely in the neighborhood, like I was on my own, you know, rocking and rolling, riding through through backyards, bicycle, building forts. We backed up to a graveyard, which was a cool experience to live. Yeah,
I can
You're
imagine.
talking about, hide and seek at a whole different level. But I also remember by the time I was 9 or 10, you know, one of my best friends lived over close to Hamilton Crossing Park.
Okay.
So where we lived in Cassville, well, that was a pretty decent
That's a good walk, yeah.
pretty decent bike ride.
Yeah.
You know, and you had to cross a major highway. You know, which parents will say, well, it wasn't a major highway back then. Well, you know, there's less cars, but it was still a big highway.
Yeah.
And so you know, I crossed the highway, pick up my buddy, we'd ride the bikes, go to the park, all along while not having any way or source of communication. And I know it's going to talk about that later in this book, so I don't want to get jumped ahead too much. But part of that experience of the play-based childhood, and maybe you would agree with this, is that as children, we're able to really consistently press in to handling the fears that come with that freedom. Okay? The first time the first time you get on a bike, and then you want to go up a big hill, and then you want to try to do your first jump. And, you know, so in that scenario, it's like, you know, the first time mom lets you out on your own, it's like, hey, you know, stay close by. You can go 2 houses down, but nothing past that. then it's okay. Stay in the neighborhood, and you're learning to adapt. And you know as well as I do, it's not like we came home every day and gave our parents a full log report of what we faced. So they don't know. They don't know if we wrecked the bike or if we got nervous and anxious crossing the road and maybe started to go out and then saw a car, or got in
an altercation,
at the ballpark, because whatever. And so, you're dealing with all of those, what ends up being, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety that you're working through at a young age, building this, this foundation that I now have the strength psychologically and emotionally to be able to navigate these challenging situations.
Yeah, you're building up the calluses for life itself.
For life itself.
Yeah, so you're able to and as a child, you're not realizing that. You don't understand the impact that's having, but what impact that's going to have on you in the future. But you start to realize, looking back, because we've experienced that type of life, that those were key points and key lessons that we learned as kids, and how to just face life. And I think that's you mentioned the word fear, and he does a great job of defining, using the medical definition of anxiety and the difference between anxiety and fear, where fear is being afraid of something that is an imminent threat, where anxiety is something that you think is going to happen.
Right.
And that's a huge difference, right? When you mentioned the example of riding the bike, or getting those altercations, the fear of crossing the road, whatever, crossing the highways, you've literally you're experiencing that, versus some of these stats that we'll go through of anxiety, where it's this threat or this fear that may not even happen.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that calluses built already, then things that you perceive to be threats aren't really threats, and you don't have the equipment, you don't have the toolage, you don't have the experience to even know how to navigate that.
100%, you don't. And the truth is like with raising boys, and of course I have no girls, so it's hard for me to speak to that. But although I was raised by 3 and a mom, so I can speak to it a little bit. The truth is playing a video game, playing Fortnite, where you're battling somebody or whatever the game is. I don't really know, but you're fighting somebody type of thing. It's no fear to you,
right?
So once again, you're not getting what you need to become a man in that situation. So if that's where all your time is, you are I gotta be careful there. You're incapable. You're not equipped,
right,
to lead in a way that you should, with stability for the next season of life, for yourself, for your career, for your family, whatever it may be. So
yeah, because he mentions it in the previous section, the preface of the high entry point versus a entry point versus a low entry point,
in relationships,
or lower exit point in relationships, or even that video game analogy. If you're going through a difficult round, or through a video game and it's difficult, what do? You just restart.
Mm-hmm.
You just restart and start all over again.
Yeah.
If you're having
which, by the way, is the exact thing I do with my golf game. I keep my score on the app. I do. I keep my score on the app by, like, if I'm playing like 18, by the time I get to hole 8 or 9, if it's really bad, I just delete it.
You just delete it.
Yeah.
Like it never happened.
Like it never happened. It's just good. It's good.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but with some of these platforms out there, if you have that tension between someone or someone you don't even know, what do? It's an easy way to get out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I either block or just leave the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, and you can't do that in the real world.
Healthy. No,
healthily.
you can't. Not at all. So all right. So Jonathan Haidt, he's getting prepared to write this book, and I want to give a quick history here on how he basically ended up with this book. So Jonathan Haidt is under contract ultimately for 2 other books, and one of the books he actually was writing for the American some type of magazine or whatever it may be, not a magazine, but association. Yeah. American Life and the Atlantic. Sorry. He was writing for the Atlantic, and he was writing an essay on why the last 10 years of American life have been uniquely stupid. I thought, oh, I need to find that. That's pretty interesting. Which after writing that essay, it basically brought him under contract to write a book titled Life After Babel, adapting to a world we may never again share. Okay? Life After Babel. So he's under contract to write this book. And chapter 1 of this book is, in his thoughts, he's doing the research. Chapter 1 of this book is going to be teen health as they transfer their life into the virtual world. And kind of he's been doing research on this, kind of a bit of a side gig. He's jumping in, he's looking at it, he's preparing chapter 1 of this book. And through that process, he starts running across these reports and this data. And basically, runs across the data to the point where he says, you know what? I can't stop here. I'm finding things that are alarming, and I'm finding information that I can't let go. I got to figure this out. So let's go ahead and jump through some of the information that he finds, which, I'll lead it off here with literally the first chart being on major depression among teens.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. If you're following with us, this is going to be on page 24, and the chart's there. And basically, Mo, the major depression among teens since year 2010, 145% increase for girls and 161% increase among boys, with a major surge from 2010 to 2015. And so he starts and he's like, okay, when he finds this, he's like, well, as anybody else would come up with, what the heck is going on in 2010 to 2015? What's going on and what happened in 2010?
Yeah.
Why all of a sudden in 2010 do you see this massive surge in depression and anxiety? And so he's like, well, if this is here, I wonder if there's other similar psychological disorders that are also, seeing surge and coinciding with a similar time frame. And so he begins to search, and you can probably throw out a few on there or a few out there.
Yeah, from 2010 and on, anxiety among college students up 134%, depression 106, ADHD 72%, bipolar 57%. Anxiety from 2010 for ages 18 to 25, that's up 139%. For 26 to 34-year-olds, it's up 103%. And all of those, I don't want to use the word illnesses, but in all of those psychological quote unquote disorders, hopefully I'm saying it the right way, you see the major rise and a major spike in 2010 on.
Correct.
Like that 2010 year, if you look prior to it, it's almost like a straight line, but then all of a sudden you get this hockey stick right at 2010 in all of those instances.
And what's interesting to me is he goes from seeing this generalized spike in 2010 to start saying, okay, what if I segment this by age? Mm-hmm. What does it look like when I do the analysis on anxiety by age? What does it look like when we look at emergency room visits for self-harm?
Oh gosh,
and when he jumps into the age, what he begins to see is that, hey, this spike is significant, but it's predominantly zeroed in on children 10 to 14 years old.
Mm-hmm. The Gen Z population.
The Gen Z population, or maybe young millennials. And so he's like, look, I'm looking at emergency room visits for self-harm, age 10 to 14, suicide rates, age 10 to 14, and there's just so much consistency with this massive increase with the psychological disorders. And then the result of sustaining these disorders with them being untreated, which ends up being, self-harm and ultimately suicide. And these are for 10 and 14-year-old children,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I mean, it's so alarming. I mean, those those numbers and those stats are so alarming for such young kids. And so he goes back and say, okay, well, what's happened in 2010? Like,
Or what's
causing this rise of these rates? And so one of the things he looks at is this adoption of technology around that time. So he looks at and points out, like, basically the rise of internet right in the early 2000s. You see this big spike in personal computers and internet, but then there's this overlapping between personal computers, technology, and then the rise of social media and smartphones, all coinciding at that same time frame. Mm-hmm. In the preface, he mentions that and I'm sure you witnessed too, because you're in my generation. But when you had personal computers and internet, most homes had one computer, house computer, and so your interactions with internet and tech and computers were pretty much out in the open.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because
unless
usually
you're sneaking at night going to Instant Messenger.
Because it was a one computer, it was always left in, like, usually the living room or something where anybody could walk by at any time.
And you didn't have access to it outside. When you're out there playing, you're out playing. You're not at home with your computer.
I remember those days.
I remember
those days sneaking around.
Oh yeah,
you talking about risky? That's that fear. You're like pushing the button. You're sneaking around. You're trying to get to the living room quietly at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Get on Messenger and before mom and dad see you up.
I know.
Man, that's risky.
That's risky.
Yeah. I'd slap myself.
But then in mid 2010, you start to see this rise in social media, and with smartphones, and all of a sudden, especially with smartphones, you now have access to the internet 24/7 in your pocket.
Yeah.
And then the rise of teenagers having access to smartphones. Right. Mm-hmm. So now all of a sudden you have this technology that was once a stationary type of technology, now being introduced to teens, now having access to it 24/7.
Well, the adoption rate to technology by like 2012, I don't know if you have that statistic, but I want to say it was like 70 some odd % by kids that are of that age range, like 10 to 14. I think I have it right here.
Here it is. So in 2011, 77% of American teens had a phone, but just 23% had smartphones.
Right.
So even though they had phones, most of those phones at that time, if they weren't smartphones, were just, your normal phones that were just used for communication. Right, communicating between parents.
79% of teens owned a smartphone. I think also a special note that he makes here is that
by 2016, 79% of them had smartphones.
79% had smartphones, and then also,
and 28% of those but 28% of ages 8 through 12 had smartphones out of that 79%.
Yeah, that's frustrating.
Yeah.
Two, something to notate is the creation of iPhone 4 in 2010. 2010 was when they created. Wasn't that right? 2010 was when the iPhone 4 was created. And iPhone 4 was unique because iPhone 4 was the first iPhone that had the self-facing camera. Now, we all know, right, as a result of how we are created, as men and women, that naturally women are more exposed, I would think. I'm not a psychologist, but I would think that little girls naturally deal with more concern and anxiety and are more aware of their physical appearance than men. And so when the iPhone 4 comes out, along with Instagram, which is a platform focused on, not so much communication, but predominantly photography and photos, and the ability to now take a selfie, and then the filters to make you better than what you feel like you are, all of that at a very vital developmental stage of one's life, just, you could see, you can see like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on right here in this moment that might be the cause supporting the massive increase in some of these unfortunate statistics.
Yeah, especially with filters, right? I mean, like you're literally able to enhance, your physical appearance consistently, and that pressure of always trying to be perfect, or a comparison trap. With these filters is I think one of the things that has really spiked, what has caused the spiking in the anxiety between girls, because the filter, the ability to literally change your appearance. I mean, again, I'm no psychologist, but I think that has to do with so much self acceptance, or even that confidence you have to just walk around in your natural, or just show your natural skin, because now you have the ability to change, every quote unquote imperfection, just to smooth out your skin, just to make your social media presence better than it really is, because now you're able to change that.
It really is. You can see it. I mean, the writing is on the wall,
Yeah.
and so these
and then also the time frame too. I mean, he writes in this 2015 report that he found that teens with social media accounts reported spending about 2 hours a day on social media. Okay, so now it's not just the again, but we mentioned last week, it's not only just the material that they're seeing, it's also the usage rates. Right. So now we're talking 2 hours a day on social media, and teens overall reported spending an average of nearly 7 hours a day of leisure time, not counting school and homework, on screen media. And by 2022, then that number had doubled to 46%. So all of a sudden, you're talking about spending 7 hours in a given day in front of a screen.
Yeah.
That is, and he uses this quote. What did he say? He used the phrase, "We are forever elsewhere," and I love that, because I've seen it in my own house, where they're not, but the kids are not present in the moment. Mm-hmm. They are present in a virtual world, trying to be present in
forever elsewhere.
You're forever elsewhere.
Yeah, that's.
I love that, because you
a great
see
descriptive.
It, right? The pressure of having backlash on social media, right? From an audience that you probably don't even know. Mm-hmm. Scrolling through comments and really having, being impacted by people in comments and posts that you don't even know.
You don't know.
And you're constantly trying to see an update and view a virtual world instead of being present in this physical world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are. I mean, it really is spot on. It's alarming.
Yeah.
But it is very obvious, I feel, and maybe I'm biased, but I feel like it's obvious that all of this mixed together is like a perfect recipe to derail the young, Gen Z trying to navigate all of this at such a young age,
an impressionable age,
and being completely unprepared. And so now you have a child who's now a young adult who, has went through this. And of course, we're not saying this is for every single kid out there, right? Mm-hmm. But obviously you see the spikes, and they're dealing with anxiety and depression. And anxiety, you mentioned it earlier, so I don't want to just jump past it. You said that, fear is this natural response to what we perceive as like an imminent, issue.
Right.
And so our bodies are built that way, Our bodies, when we face a situation that creates fear within us, we have a natural response to it. Our nervous system, this is going back to my EMS days, hopefully I remember it. In our physical bodies, we have a nervous system that's basically broken up into two sections, sympathetic and parasympathetic. And the sympathetic nervous system is similar to like, a gas pedal in a vehicle. You know, when you need to get it and go, you punch down on that gas pedal, it's full throttle. And so when it comes to our sympathetic nervous system, when we see and we feel and we absorb something that is triggering a fear, which is like, hey, this could be self-harming, this could be, someone else could be harmed or whatever it may be, our body launches into this fight or flight, which is a dump of adrenaline or epinephrine. And so, our blood vessels dilate, our oxygen is increased to our brain, our heart rate's pumping quicker, blood pressure's higher. And so when it comes to anxiety, though, we get a similar touch of that feel, so it's real for people that are facing anxiety. They're physically feeling it, okay? They physically feel because their body is reacting, but it's reacting to something that is just perceived. It's not imminent.
Right.
It may not even be true.
It may not even be true.
It's just the perception. And what's even worse is now we have kids and youth that are having this type of response with social fear, which is we're perceiving to be afraid or to be anxious about a situation that is social in its context, and something like maybe a message that's been floating around Instagram or this idea that something might happen that to our population or to our educational system or to our community or whatever, and it's just not even real, and so they're completely unequipped to manage. And so we have allowed, not that it can't be fixed, but we have allowed this type of technology to really create some challenges, I think.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to, when we started today's conversation about, some of the ability to navigate and to deal with real threat, the fear, like you said, of crossing the highway. You're able to navigate that because, we built the calluses. We were able to, in that play-based childhood, we were able to cope and manage and deal with it and overcome it in some areas. But again, in this social world, the social media world, if you're not equipped to handle that perceived threat, then you don't know how to handle it, and so your body just naturally goes into that fear mode, that
fight or flight.
Sympathetic or asymptomatic,
sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah. Your body has
response.
Your body has that response because you haven't been wired properly to say to yourself, well, that's just not a real thing. Let me just chalk it up as anxiety, and it's not a real threat, and move past it, or figure out how to move past it. But if you don't have that, if you don't have the tools to be able to do it, then your body just goes into it as a perceived fear when it really isn't.
And so he goes through, he basically says, look, I found this data. I think I know what the problem is. And of course, he's presenting his case. And at the end of the chapter 1, so to wrap it up, he kind of puts a defense to some of the, I guess, he builds a response to some of the people or groups out there that might disagree with the way in which he's understood and interpreted this data points.
I can see that because, again, you're going to get a lot of pushback from those who may be able to either, who know how to handle social media,
right,
or who are in charge of these social media platforms that say, well, if you think about Gen Z, there's a lot that has gone on in that generation, right?
Yeah,
you start in 2001, you have 9/11, right? Then you have a Great Recession. Then you see this rise in school shootings, if you want to say, or at least the publicity of school mass shootings and school shootings. And so one could say, yeah, smartphones and social media platforms, yeah. But what about all these social issues,
right,
these issues that these children have gone through? couldn't that be the
Yeah,
reason?
now you can throw COVID in that.
Now you can
know?
throw COVID in that, right?
I
A
agree.
rise in divorced parents, right? Maybe all that is the foundation of anxiety.
And I think there's no doubt that some of those situations have definitely had its effect. You know, I would think potentially on young children growing up in those situations compared to one that's not. But the truth is the data doesn't support that. And the reason it doesn't, in his response, is that, look, well, if you take, for instance, 9/11, then how do you explain the same trend in Europe? You know, if you see, if you're going to talk about not just 9/11, but the Great Recession here in the U.S., how do you explain the same data point through the growth in the economy in China? You know, because this is unilateral, male-female, predominantly of a specific age, but throughout the entire world.
Right.
You know? And so I think he's got a good point there.
Yeah, it's not just isolated here in the U.S. It's a surge globally.
Mm-hmm. It's a surge. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to jumping into next week, but it's chapter 1 was a big one.
Yeah,
it
really was.
Definitely set the pace for me and was like, man, you know, this is the foundation of the fear itself and the concern that, hey, we have a real problem right now as young as a generation raising the next, right? We need to be aware, and we need to be focused. We need to be locked in. And the truth is, I want to say it one more time. The issue is not technology.
Right.
The issue is not social platforms. There's a lot of value and benefit. They're great tools. It's like saying that you know, the problem with, you know, our lives is money. Well, it's not money. Money's a tool.
Right.
Just like these platforms are tools. So the reality is us parents, guardians, people that are caring for the next generation, we have to be intentional, is what it boils down to protecting our kids so that they are raised in the direction that they need and should go.
Yeah, I love how he right before he sums it all up, he says children born in the late 1990s were the first generation in history who went through puberty in a virtual world. It's as though we sent Gen Z to grow up in Mars when we gave them smartphones in the early 2000s, in the largest uncontrolled experiment humanity has ever performed on its children. Wow.
The largest experiment.
Uncontrolled
experiment. Yeah, you're right. With literally no testing, no data, no nothing on the harm it could create.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot to unpack in one chapter, but you know, I'm excited to see what else he has.
I'm too.
Yeah,
I am looking forward to working through it. And so, yeah, I hope everybody comes back next week. Another great, I think we're doing chapter 2 and chapter 3.
Yes.
Next week. So it's going to be a lot, but yeah. See you next week, right?
That's right.
All right. We'll do it again.
We'll do it again.